The restaurant was quiet except for the soft clinking of glasses and the low murmur of conversations. Crystal chandeliers reflected light onto polished tables, giving the space an elegant glow. It was the kind of place that attracted people with money, influence, and a taste for luxury. On this particular evening, one man stood out even among the wealthy guests. He entered the restaurant with a brisk pace, his expression tight, showing irritation that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Everyone noticed him instantly. The staff immediately straightened, aware that a high-profile client had arrived. The maitre d' quickly approached, bowing slightly, and led him toward a reserved table in the far corner. He had been traveling all day, attending meetings that had drained him, and now he expected to find a meal that matched the status he carried. But from the moment he sat down, his patience was thin. He tapped his fingers on the table, glanced around impatiently, and frowned every time a staff member passed by. His eyes followed every movement in the room with scrutiny, as if measuring every detail against some invisible standard. He was known in business circles for his wealth, his sharp mind, and, unfortunately, his temper. It was not uncommon for people around him to feel the pressure of his presence without him saying a word. Tonight, the tension in the air seemed almost tangible. The waitress assigned to his table was new to this branch of the restaurant. She had been trained well and had a calm demeanor, but she had been running between tables all night. A small mix-up in the kitchen had delayed her arrival at his table by a few minutes. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, walking briskly yet gracefully toward him, balancing the menus in her hands. She knew the restaurant's reputation for excellence, and she knew the billionaire was exactly the type of customer who could either become a lifelong admirer or a relentless critic. She hoped for the former, though she prepared herself mentally for the latter. When she reached the table, she greeted him politely, her voice steady but soft. "Good evening, sir. I apologize for the wait. Here is the menu, and I am happy to assist with any questions you may have." Her smile was professional, not forced, and she made eye contact just enough to convey respect without overstepping. In her mind, she reminded herself that confidence and calmness were her strongest tools. She had dealt with difficult customers before, though never anyone with this level of power and influence in the room. The billionaire looked at her and immediately frowned. His voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet background of the restaurant. "This is unacceptable. I expected service to be prompt. I don't have time for delays. You must understand the importance of punctuality in my world." He leaned slightly forward, his gaze fixed on her, assessing her reaction. It was not just about the delay. It was about asserting dominance. He wanted to make it clear that mistakes, however small, were intolerable in his presence. The waitress kept her composure, nodding politely. "I completely understand, sir. I am very sorry for the delay. It was unexpected, but I will ensure your experience tonight is excellent." Her tone was measured, calm, and professional. She did not try to argue or make excuses, because she knew that trying to justify the delay would only make things worse. The key, she thought, was to acknowledge the concern and move forward with confidence. But the billionaire was not satisfied. His eyes narrowed, and his lips pressed into a thin line. He leaned back slightly, his hand brushing a glass of water, making it rock slightly without spilling. "You must understand," he continued, his voice rising just enough to attract attention from nearby tables. "When I make a reservation, I expect perfection. This is not just about a meal. This is about respect, about understanding that my time is valuable. Can you handle that?" His tone was almost theatrical, designed to embarrass her, to test her composure. The waitress remained unshaken. She smiled faintly, her calmness contrasting with his agitation. "Yes, sir. I will make sure everything is to your satisfaction. I want your experience to be enjoyable and seamless." Her words were simple, but the firmness in her tone carried weight. She did not apologize excessively or sound fearful, because she understood that fear would not earn respect. She wanted him to see her as competent, not as someone to be intimidated. Guests nearby had begun to notice the interaction. The billionaire's reputation preceded him, and some had seen similar moments unfold with others. They watched in silence, sensing the tension that was building. The waitress, aware of the audience, kept her posture straight and her demeanor professional. She knew that how she handled this moment could define her evening, and possibly her reputation in the eyes of other influential patrons. The billionaire leaned forward again, lowering his voice slightly, but the sharpness remained. "I have dealt with hundreds of people in my life," he said, his tone carrying both authority and condescension. "Rarely do I encounter someone who is so slow, so unprepared. Tell me, have you worked in fine dining before? Or is this your first real job?" He smirked slightly, thinking his words might rattle her. It was clear that he assumed she would be intimidated, perhaps even flustered. The waitress paused for a brief second, just long enough to acknowledge the question without hesitation. "I have experience in service and hospitality, sir. I have worked in busy restaurants and high-pressure environments before. I am trained to handle demanding guests and ensure that service meets their expectations." Her response was calm, professional, and measured. She did not challenge his authority, but she made it clear that she was not inexperienced or unprepared. For a moment, the billionaire seemed taken aback. He had expected her to falter under the weight of his words, but instead, she met his gaze confidently. His eyes flickered briefly with surprise before narrowing again, a hint of tension appearing in his jaw. This was not how he usually encountered staff. He was used to people bending quickly under pressure, apologizing profusely, or stumbling to explain themselves. She had done none of those things. Instead, she had demonstrated competence without defiance, respect without fear. The waiter at the neighboring table shifted uncomfortably, sensing the silent power struggle. Other patrons looked on, some pretending to focus on their own meals, but their curiosity was evident. The air seemed heavier, charged with the energy of a confrontation that had not yet erupted into chaos. The waitress, meanwhile, placed the menus on the table with a smooth motion, careful not to make sudden movements that could escalate tension. Every step, every gesture, every word was deliberate, reflecting her training and inner resolve. The billionaire glanced at the menu, tapping his fingers again, though now a little less sharply. "I suppose we can begin," he said, though the irritation in his voice lingered. He studied her carefully, still assessing, still looking for any sign of weakness. The waitress nodded, ready to take his order, her calmness unbroken. She understood that the next moments would define the tone of the evening. Her composure and professionalism were her shields, and so far, they were holding strong. Despite his wealth and power, the billionaire was starting to realize that his usual methods of intimidation were not as effective with her. He was used to quick submission, to staff who would immediately defer and apologize. This was different. There was no fear, no trembling. Instead, there was quiet confidence and polite efficiency. It was disarming, though he would not admit it aloud. He continued to observe her, searching for a flaw, a slip, something that would allow him to regain control of the situation. The waitress, meanwhile, continued to move calmly and gracefully. She had learned early in life that confidence was not about arrogance. It was about knowing your abilities and staying grounded even when challenged. She understood that some guests could be demanding or even harsh, but she had the power to choose how she responded. By remaining professional and respectful, she maintained control of her own dignity, regardless of how others tried to undermine it. The tension in the room was quiet but palpable. The billionaire continued to assess her, while she continued to serve with precision and care. Other guests could feel the unspoken battle of wills, though no one spoke. They could sense the intelligence and calm strength of the waitress and the growing frustration of the man who expected obedience and fear. It was a rare scene, a moment of human interaction stripped of pretense, where personalities clashed and true character was revealed. As the waitress took the first order and ensured every detail was correct, she remained focused on the task at hand. She knew that perfection in service was not just about speed or efficiency. It was about attention, care, and professionalism. She moved with purpose, anticipating needs and responding with clarity. The billionaire, though still irritated, began to realize that his efforts to belittle her were failing. The realization, subtle at first, began to shift the dynamics of the evening. For the first time, he was not fully in control. By the time she returned with drinks and ensured the table was set to his standards, a quiet respect had begun to form, even if unspoken. The billionaire, though not ready to admit it, had recognized that this was not the kind of staff member who could be intimidated. She was calm, competent, and unshakable, a combination he rarely encountered. He leaned back slightly, adjusting his posture, still observing, still cautious, but a new thought had entered his mind. Perhaps this evening would not unfold as he had expected. And so the scene was set. The tension lingered in the air, not as hostility, but as a quiet test of patience, skill, and composure. The waitress had arrived late. Yes, but her professionalism and calm intelligence had already begun to turn the situation around. The billionaire, used to controlling the world around him, was meeting a challenge he had not anticipated. It was a human encounter in the most unexpected of ways, a reminder that strength and dignity often appear quietly, without raising a voice, yet command attention and respect naturally. The waitress moved carefully around the table, placing plates and drinks with precise attention to detail. Every gesture was calm and measured, reflecting her training and the pride she took in her work. She had learned early on that, in moments of tension, the way one carried oneself could make all the difference. She kept her voice steady, her hands steady, and her posture straight. To anyone watching, she appeared almost unflappable, a picture of professionalism. But the billionaire across from her was not so easily controlled. He leaned back in his chair, studying her as though she were a puzzle he intended to solve. His frown deepened, and the faint tapping of his fingers on the table grew more persistent. He was used to situations bending to his will with a glance or a word. Yet here, he realized, he had a staff member who did not waver, did not falter, and did not seem impressed or intimidated by his reputation. His eyes flicked around the room as though to draw attention from the other guests, some of whom had discreetly paused in their conversations to watch the scene unfold. He spoke louder than necessary, making sure his words carried, not just to the waitress, but to the diners seated nearby. "Are you always this slow with people of importance?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Or is this a special performance for me?" The waitress took a breath and smiled faintly, calmly replying, "I strive to give every guest the best service, sir. I assure you, I am doing everything I can to ensure your experience is excellent." Her voice was gentle yet firm. She did not flinch, she did not lower her eyes, and she did not let his tone dictate her emotions. She understood that responding with anger or defensiveness would only give him the satisfaction he sought. Instead, she responded with professionalism, which in itself was a quiet act of strength. The billionaire's expression darkened. He had expected apologies, nervous laughter, or visible discomfort. That had not happened. Instead, she had answered politely with dignity intact. He had come prepared to belittle her, to assert power over someone he assumed would be easy to humiliate, but the plan was failing. His frustration grew, though he masked it behind a veneer of control. "Excuse me?" he said sharply, leaning even closer. "You think being polite is enough when someone of my stature is involved? I am not used to being treated like this. Most people would have groveled by now." He spoke with a tone meant to humiliate, to make her feel small. But she did not react the way he anticipated. Instead, she took another breath and maintained her calm demeanor. "I understand your expectations, sir. I respect your position and your time. That is why I am focused on providing the service you deserve. I want to make this a pleasant experience for you." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She acknowledged him without diminishing herself. She respected him without surrendering her own dignity. The billionaire's frown deepened as he considered her words. He had underestimated her. He had assumed that her position, her job, and her role as a waitress would make her easy to dominate. He had thought he could assert authority and that she would respond with fear or embarrassment. He had miscalculated, and now a subtle panic began to creep into his otherwise confident demeanor. He adjusted in his seat, leaning back slightly as he tried to regain control. He decided to escalate, to create a moment of public humiliation that he believed would finally put her in her place. "Perhaps you don't understand," he said, his voice rising so that others could hear. "The kind of people I deal with, the level of influence I have, this is not a game. Mistakes are not tolerated, and poor service is not acceptable. Do you understand what I am saying?" She looked at him calmly, her gaze steady, and replied, "Yes, sir. I understand completely." There was no trace of fear, no hesitation. She did not argue, she did not become defensive, and she did not shrink under the weight of his anger. She remained composed, which only seemed to frustrate him further. The room was silent except for the subtle movements of staff and guests, all aware that a confrontation was taking place. Other diners watched discreetly, sensing the tension but unsure how it would unfold. It was clear that this was not a typical interaction. Something about the billionaire's presence, combined with the waitress's calm professionalism, had created a moment that felt charged with unspoken drama. He leaned forward again, his tone sharp and deliberate. "Do you know what it means to work for someone like me? Do you understand that every detail matters, that there is no room for error? People like you rarely understand that until it is too late." His words were meant to intimidate, to diminish her confidence. He assumed he could pressure her into submission through authority and volume. The waitress did not flinch. She continued to move efficiently, arranging the table and ensuring that everything was prepared exactly as he requested. "I understand the importance of attention to detail, sir. I take my responsibilities seriously, and I want to ensure that everything meets your expectations. I am focused on doing my best for you and for all guests." Her response was calm, clear, and respectful. She acknowledged his concern without being intimidated by his position or wealth. The billionaire's eyes narrowed. He could not understand why his usual tactics were not working. In his experience, people of lower rank or perceived status would quickly become submissive or nervous when confronted with authority. Yet here was someone who held her ground quietly, confidently, and without hesitation. His frustration grew, though he tried to maintain a composed exterior. He decided to try another tactic, one that he often used with people he assumed were uneducated or inexperienced. He began to speak faster, switching words and phrases into Mandarin, thinking she would be unable to respond. "Do you understand this language? Do you know what I am saying?" he asked with an edge of arrogance. He expected confusion, stammering, or embarrassment. To his surprise, she paused for only a brief moment and then answered flawlessly in Mandarin. Her pronunciation was precise, her tone polite yet confident. She addressed his points clearly, correcting minor misunderstandings respectfully, and demonstrating that she fully understood him. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Guests glanced at each other in disbelief. Even other staff members stopped briefly, unsure how to react. The billionaire froze. His plan had completely failed. Instead of humiliation, he had inadvertently revealed a situation where his assumptions about her intelligence and capability were completely wrong. His eyes widened slightly, his mouth opening in surprise, though he quickly composed himself. He had never expected someone in her position to have such skills, and he struggled to regain control of the interaction. The waitress, aware of the sudden shift, continued with her service, unfazed by the reaction. She maintained her polite demeanor, continuing to arrange the table and take the order. She did not gloat, she did not celebrate, and she did not show even a hint of superiority. She had remained professional and composed throughout, letting her skills and confidence speak for themselves. The billionaire, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, processing the situation. He was not used to being surprised in this way, not used to being outmatched quietly in a situation he assumed he controlled. A part of him recognized that he had misjudged her entirely, and for the first time that evening, he felt a flicker of humility. He had assumed that status and wealth automatically commanded respect and obedience, But that assumption was being challenged in front of everyone. Guests at nearby tables were whispering quietly, their curiosity now turned into admiration for the waitress. Some exchanged glances, acknowledging the quiet power in her composure and professionalism. They could see that she had faced a difficult challenge and had navigated it with skill, dignity, and calm intelligence. It was a rare moment, a human display of confidence in the face of intimidation. The billionaire's frustration did not vanish completely, but it softened slightly. He realized that his attempts to humiliate her were not only failing but were making him look impulsive and arrogant. He adjusted his tone, speaking more carefully, though the edge in his voice was still present. "Very well," he said slowly. "Let us continue with the service. I expect nothing less than excellence." The waitress nodded politely, maintaining her calm demeanor. She understood that the evening was far from over, and that she would need to continue to provide flawless service. But in that moment, she had demonstrated that intelligence, skill, and confidence could not be judged by appearance, position, or status. She had turned a potentially humiliating situation into a display of quiet strength, without raising her voice or losing her composure. The tension in the room began to ease slightly, though the sense of anticipation remained. Everyone present knew that the interaction between the billionaire and the waitress was unusual, memorable, and remarkable. They sensed that what had just occurred was more than a simple exchange of service. It was a moment that revealed character, resilience, and professionalism in a way that would not be forgotten. As she moved to attend other tables, her calm efficiency continued to impress. She had navigated the confrontation successfully, maintained her dignity, and subtly shifted the dynamics of power. The billionaire, though still adjusting to the unexpected turn, continued his meal with a new awareness. He had encountered someone who could not be intimidated by wealth or status alone, someone who commanded respect through quiet confidence, skill, and intelligence. The evening was far from over, and challenges might still arise, but the first confrontation had already set the tone. The waitress had proven that humility, professionalism, and calm intelligence were more powerful than arrogance and intimidation. And in that moment, everyone who witnessed it understood that sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest authority. The restaurant had grown quieter in the corner where the billionaire sat, though the rest of the room continued its soft hum of conversation. Some of the guests were aware of the tension at his table and couldn't help but glance occasionally. It was unusual to see someone so powerful and so visibly irritated being met with calm, composed resistance. The waitress moved back and forth, attending to his requests while keeping the same quiet, steady presence she had shown from the start. The billionaire studied her, leaning slightly forward as if trying to find some hidden weakness. He had tried to humiliate her with his words, he had attempted to assert authority through tone, and even switched to Mandarin thinking she would be unprepared. Yet none of his tactics had worked. Instead of embarrassment or fear, he had met her with skill, respect, and surprising intelligence. He could not hide his growing confusion. He had assumed the world would bend before him, that people would recognize his power immediately and react with deference. Tonight, that assumption was proving false, and the realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He decided to test her further. "You speak Mandarin," he said, his tone sharp, but now edged with curiosity rather than pure anger. "Do you speak any other languages? Perhaps something I would not expect." His words were meant to catch her off guard, but also carried an element of condescension, implying he doubted her abilities. He assumed she would hesitate, stumble, or respond nervously. The waitress paused, considering her words carefully. She did not want to boast, yet she also knew honesty was the best approach. "Yes, sir," she replied smoothly. "I also speak French and Spanish, and I have some knowledge of Italian. I studied languages as part of my education and have worked in environments where multiple languages were necessary." Her answer was precise, polite, and factual. She made no attempt to intimidate him or draw attention to herself, yet the impact of her words was immediate. The billionaire leaned back, his eyebrows raised slightly. He had expected some modest answer, perhaps something that confirmed his assumptions of her simplicity. Instead, She had quietly revealed skills and experience that he had not anticipated. He had intended to make her look small in front of the other diners, yet he now realized she had earned, at least for the moment, an unspoken respect. "Impressive," he said slowly, the word carrying more disbelief than praise. "Very few people take the time to learn multiple languages, and fewer still can use them fluently. I suppose this is part of what makes you capable of working here." His tone had softened slightly, though the edge remained. He had no intention of fully conceding, but he had begun to understand that his assumptions had been wrong. The waitress acknowledged the statement politely, without gloating or drawing attention to herself. "Thank you, sir. I believe learning languages helps me communicate better and serve guests from different backgrounds. It is part of my job to ensure that every guest feels comfortable and understood." Her words were simple, yet they carried a subtle authority. She demonstrated skill without arrogance, intelligence without threat, and calm without fear. The billionaire frowned again, a flash of irritation returning. He had not intended to respect her, nor had he anticipated feeling surprised by a waitress. He was used to commanding rooms, closing deals, and asserting power over others without resistance. Yet here was someone in a service role, someone he assumed would be easily dominated, who was quietly defying his expectations. He studied her carefully, realizing that every word she spoke, every action she took, subtly challenged his perception of the world. He decided to push further, to see if she could maintain her composure under more pressure. "You have experience in service and hospitality, you speak multiple languages, and yet you chose this job?" he said, his voice firm but tinged with disbelief. "Tell me why. Surely you could have taken a position in a more prestigious environment or earned far more in another field. Why are you here?" He expected a hesitant answer, one that would seem apologetic or defensive. The waitress responded calmly, meeting his gaze evenly. "This job provides me with stability and allows me to support my family. I also enjoy the work, helping guests, and ensuring they have a positive experience. While I have had other opportunities, I chose this position because it suits my current needs and allows me to balance my responsibilities. I take pride in performing well regardless of the environment." Her answer was measured and clear. She did not speak to impress him, yet her honesty and confidence carried weight. The billionaire's eyes narrowed slightly. He had assumed that her choice of work indicated a lack of ambition or ability. Instead, her words reflected thoughtfulness, responsibility, and maturity. She was not simply reacting to life. She was making decisions that balanced practicality and purpose. For the first time, he considered that her intelligence and skill could not be judged solely by her role or title. He shifted in his chair, still trying to maintain control of the interaction. "So you are content to serve others, rather than pursue a path that might bring you more recognition or reward?" His tone carried both challenge and disbelief, as though he could not imagine someone choosing responsibility over prestige. The waitress smiled faintly, maintaining her composure. "Serving others does not mean lacking ambition," she said quietly. "It means understanding the value of work, responsibility, and integrity. There is ambition in doing a job well, in learning, and in growing through experience, even if it is not recognized by everyone. I aim to do my work with respect and care, and that is my measure of success." Her words were simple yet powerful. She had not sought to lecture him, yet the message was clear. Value and competence are not dictated by position or status. The billionaire exhaled slowly, realizing that she had calmly turned the conversation into a subtle lesson in humility. He had intended to belittle her, yet she had responded with clarity, intelligence, and composure. He studied her carefully, noting her steady hands, calm voice, and confident posture. It was evident that she had faced challenges before and had developed the resilience to remain calm under pressure. For the first time that evening, he felt that he had underestimated someone who, on the surface, appeared ordinary. He decided to test her further, though not in words this time. He ordered a complex meal, requiring multiple substitutions and adjustments, expecting that she would stumble or make an error. The waitress listened carefully, confirming each detail with precision. She repeated the order back to him, ensuring that everything was correct. Her attention to detail and professionalism were flawless. Even the chef, who overheard the instructions, was impressed with her clarity and efficiency. The billionaire's frustration turned into a grudging admiration. He had expected mistakes, hesitations, or excuses, but instead, he encountered competence, calm, and intelligence. He adjusted in his seat, his tone softening slightly, though he still tried to maintain a sense of authority. "Very well," he said. "We will see how well this is executed. I hope it meets my expectations." The waitress nodded politely. "It will, sir. I will ensure everything is perfect." She did not add unnecessary words, nor did she seek to challenge him. Her confidence was in her actions, in her ability to do her work well. She had learned early that words are less important than results, and that calm competence often speaks louder than authority or wealth. The other guests, though trying to remain discreet, were clearly aware of the dynamic at the table. Some exchanged quiet glances, recognizing the subtle power shift that had taken place. What had begun as an attempt at humiliation had turned into a demonstration of skill, patience, and intelligence. The waitress had maintained her dignity while quietly asserting her capability, and the billionaire, despite his wealth and influence, had been forced to acknowledge it internally. As the evening continued, she moved from table to table with the same grace and professionalism, yet the encounter in the corner remained on everyone's mind. The billionaire watched her closely, no longer with the intention of humiliation but with a reluctant respect. He realized that appearances can be deceiving and that true capability is often hidden behind quiet confidence and dedication. By the time the meal was served, perfectly prepared and timed, the billionaire's attitude had shifted subtly. He no longer attempted to belittle her. Instead, he observed with a new awareness, recognizing that he had underestimated the intelligence, skill, and composure of someone who appeared ordinary but was anything but. The waitress had turned a situation that could have been humiliating into a quiet victory. She had shown that respect is earned through skill, professionalism, and dignity, not assumed through status or wealth. Her calm intelligence had shifted the dynamics of power without confrontation, without raising her voice, and without compromising her own integrity. The guests who witnessed the interaction carried a silent acknowledgement of her strength. They had seen a masterclass in composure, intelligence, and quiet authority. The billionaire, though still grappling with his own assumptions, had learned an unexpected lesson about humility, judgment, and respect. As the evening progressed, it became clear that the true lesson of the night was not about power, wealth, or status, but about character. The waitress had demonstrated that dignity and competence are far more impactful than arrogance and intimidation. She had transformed a tense encounter into an example of human strength, resilience, and intelligence, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had been present. And in that subtle, quiet way, the world of the restaurant shifted for a moment, revealing that appearances are not everything, that calm confidence can outshine authority, and that true respect is earned through action, not assumed through position. The restaurant had settled into a quieter rhythm, though at the billionaire's table, a subtle tension remained in the air. The guests nearby were still discreetly observing, intrigued by the unusual dynamic. The waitress moved with calm efficiency, tending to orders, refilling glasses, and adjusting plates with a quiet precision that made her presence almost commanding in its steadiness. Every movement she made seemed effortless, yet it carried weight. The billionaire had begun to realize that his initial impressions had been wrong. He had assumed that her role as a waitress, her age, and her demeanor meant she was inexperienced, uneducated, or easily intimidated. He had planned to assert his dominance through sharp words and condescension, expecting her to falter. But she had responded with quiet confidence, intelligence, and skill that he had not anticipated. And now, a new curiosity began to emerge within him, a desire to understand who she really was. "You speak several languages," he said cautiously, leaning forward, his tone no longer purely confrontational. "You handle complex orders without error, and you maintain composure under pressure." It is unusual to see someone so skilled in this environment. Tell me, what is your story? His voice was a mixture of surprise, respect, and lingering incredulity. The waitress paused briefly, measuring her words. She had navigated this kind of conversation before. Some people assumed a person in a service role must be unremarkable, and when they discovered otherwise, they often reacted with shock, curiosity, or subtle admiration. She knew that honesty, delivered with humility, would speak more than any boastful claim could. I studied abroad for several years, sir, she began, her voice calm and steady. I worked in international trade and customer relations in different countries. I learned multiple languages and developed skills in management and communication. My career path has been unconventional, and I have faced challenges, but I have always focused on learning, growing, and taking responsibility for myself and my family. She spoke quietly, but the clarity of her words drew attention. The billionaire blinked, leaning back in his chair. He had not expected this. Her words contradicted everything he had assumed. He had imagined someone who had little education or experience beyond basic service tasks. Instead, she had revealed a rich history of learning, travel, and responsibility that demanded respect. He felt a flicker of embarrassment, though he quickly tried to hide it behind a composed exterior. You chose to work here, he said slowly, trying to regain control of the conversation. With all your experience and education, why this job? Surely you could have chosen a more prestigious position, one that aligns with your skills. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity, almost disbelief. The waitress smiled faintly, a calm and thoughtful smile. This job allows me to balance my responsibilities and care for my family, she explained. It provides stability and allows me to continue learning while maintaining control over my life. Prestige and recognition are not my goals at the moment. I take pride in doing my work well and helping others. That is my measure of success. The billionaire studied her carefully, the expression on his face softening slightly. He had assumed that ambition was only measured by titles, wealth, or recognition. She had redefined ambition in a way that he had not expected, through responsibility, care, and mastery of skills. He realized that he had been judging her based on a superficial understanding of her position, rather than the substance of her character. Other guests at nearby tables had noticed the shift in the billionaire's demeanor. The quiet astonishment on his face was evident, and they began to understand that this was not just a tense interaction but a moment of revelation. A waitress, who had been underestimated and almost humiliated, was now commanding respect through honesty, intelligence, and composure. I see, he said slowly, exhaling. I assumed that this would be simple, that I could assert authority and the outcome would be obvious. But I was wrong. His voice carried a mixture of humility and reflection. For the first time, he admitted to himself that appearances could be deceiving. Power and wealth did not always guarantee insight or understanding. The waitress nodded politely. It is easy to make assumptions about others, sir, she said. But we cannot know someone's experiences or abilities without taking the time to understand them. Judging based on appearances, roles, or status rarely reflects the full truth. Her words were soft, yet they had weight. She was teaching a subtle lesson in humility and perspective without confrontation, using her own life as an example. The billionaire's expression softened further, a subtle acknowledgement of her wisdom. He realized that his attempts to belittle her had been based on arrogance and assumption. He had sought to assert dominance without understanding her true capabilities or history, and now, confronted with the reality of her skills and experience, he felt the sting of his misjudgment. You've accomplished much, yet you remain humble, he said, his voice quieter than before. You could have chosen many paths, yet you carry yourself with dignity and purpose in a role many would overlook. It is impressive. There was genuine admiration in his tone, though he struggled to fully reconcile it with his previous behavior. The waitress continued to serve the table, maintaining her calm efficiency. She did not seek recognition or praise, but the subtle shift in the billionaire's demeanor did not go unnoticed. Her quiet confidence had not only deflected his attempts at humiliation but had also prompted him to reflect on his own assumptions and behavior. Guests began to quietly murmur among themselves, recognizing the transformation in the interaction. What had begun as a tense, potentially embarrassing confrontation had evolved into a demonstration of respect, intelligence, and humility. The waitress had managed to navigate a delicate situation, turning a challenge into a moment of human insight. The billionaire, though still processing the events, leaned back and regarded her differently now. He had learned that his assumptions about people based on their position or appearance could be completely misleading. The waitress had demonstrated not only skill and intelligence, but also the ability to handle pressure with grace and dignity. "I apologize if my earlier words seemed harsh," he said after a pause. "I underestimated you, and I allowed my assumptions to guide my behavior. That was wrong, and I should have approached this differently." His voice carried sincerity, though it was awkward, reflecting his unfamiliarity with admitting fault. The waitress acknowledged his apology politely. "Thank you, sir. I accept it. We all make assumptions at times. What matters is how we respond once we recognize them. I am focused on providing the best service and ensuring a positive experience for all guests." Her words were calm and professional, demonstrating that humility and understanding could coexist with competence and strength. The atmosphere at the table shifted subtly. The tension that had dominated the early part of the evening began to ease, replaced by a quiet mutual respect. The billionaire, who had arrived intending to assert power and intimidate, was now reflecting on the depth of character and intelligence he had witnessed. The waitress, who had been underestimated and challenged, had maintained her dignity and professionalism throughout. Other guests continued to notice the subtle transformation. The scene was no longer just about a powerful man and a waitress. It had become a lesson in perception, humility, and human potential. The waitress's story, her experience, and her calm intelligence had shifted the dynamic entirely. The billionaire's initial desire to humiliate had been replaced by an acknowledgement of her abilities and character. As the meal continued, the billionaire observed her closely, his curiosity and respect growing. He realized that intelligence, capability, and dignity often exist in unexpected places. Wealth and status alone do not define skill or character. In the quiet exchange of words and actions, he was learning a lesson in humility and perspective that would likely stay with him far longer than the discomfort he had tried to impose. The waitress, moving from table to table, remained composed, her calm presence a reminder that true strength often manifests quietly. She had turned an encounter that could have been humiliating into an example of grace, professionalism, and human intelligence. Her background, once hidden beneath assumptions, was now understood, and it revealed the depth of experience and character she carried. The billionaire, reflecting on the evening, felt a subtle shift in his understanding. He had arrived with assumptions, with arrogance, and with a desire to assert dominance. But through calm intelligence, honesty, and professionalism, the waitress had reshaped the interaction. She had not only defended her dignity but had prompted him to reconsider his own behavior and perceptions. By the time the evening approached its close, the billionaire's attitude had transformed. He was no longer focused on asserting power or belittling others. Instead, he had gained a new awareness of the importance of humility, respect, and understanding. He had learned that competence and intelligence are not always visible at first glance and that assumptions can be misleading. For the waitress, the evening was a demonstration of her own principles. She had faced an intense challenge, remained composed, and used her skills and intelligence to navigate a difficult situation. She had preserved her dignity, earned respect, and shown that true strength lies in professionalism, calmness, and the courage to be authentic. The guests who had witnessed the exchange left with a quiet sense of admiration. They had seen an interaction that went beyond wealth, status, or position. They had witnessed the subtle power of composure, honesty, and intelligence in action. And they had learned, perhaps unconsciously, that appearances and assumptions rarely tell the full story of a person's capabilities or character. The billionaire sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the events. He had entered the restaurant ready to dominate, ready to assert control, and ready to demonstrate superiority. Instead, he had encountered humility, skill, and integrity. The encounter had reshaped his understanding, leaving him with a lasting lesson in respect, human potential, and the limits of assumptions. And in that quiet, elegant restaurant, the lesson was clear. Intelligence, dignity, and strength are not always visible at first glance. They are revealed through action, composure, and integrity, often in moments that test character and challenge assumptions. The waitress had shown that with calm confidence and professionalism, it is possible to turn a situation of judgment and confrontation into one of understanding, respect, and human insight. The restaurant was quieter now, as the evening approached its end. The chandeliers reflected a softer glow on the polished tables, and the low hum of conversation seemed to settle into a gentle rhythm. The earlier tension between the billionaire and the waitress had faded, but the impact of their interaction remained in the air. Everyone who had been near the table could feel that something remarkable had taken place. The billionaire sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. He was no longer frowning, no longer attempting to dominate. Instead, he appeared thoughtful, as if replaying the events of the evening in his mind. The encounter with the waitress had been unexpected, challenging, and humbling. He realized that he had come with assumptions about her abilities, her background, and her role, but all of those assumptions had been proven wrong. He had expected to belittle her, to assert power, and to demonstrate his status, but the outcome had been entirely different. The waitress had met his words with calm intelligence, answered his challenges with competence, and revealed a depth of experience he had never imagined. She had maintained her dignity and composure, even under pressure, and in doing so, had earned a respect that no amount of wealth or status could command. The waitress moved gracefully from table to table, attending to other guests, her demeanor unchanged. She was calm, confident, and professional, but there was a quiet awareness in her eyes. She knew the significance of the interaction at the billionaire's table. She had turned a potentially humiliating situation into a demonstration of strength, intelligence, and integrity. She had shown that respect is earned through action, not assumed through position or wealth. The billionaire watched her carefully. There was a subtle change in his posture, a softness in his expression that had not been there earlier. He was reflecting on the lessons he had learned, not from business, not from deals, but from a human encounter that had challenged his assumptions. He understood, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that true respect cannot be demanded. It must be recognized and earned. He finally spoke, his voice quieter than before, yet carrying sincerity. "I want to apologize again for my behavior earlier," he said. "I underestimated you. I assumed I could intimidate you with my words, but I was wrong. I have learned that appearances can be deceiving, and that intelligence, skill, and dignity are not always visible at first glance." The waitress acknowledged his words politely, maintaining her calm and professional tone. "Thank you, sir. I accept your apology. Everyone has moments where assumptions guide their actions. What matters is how we respond once we recognize them. I am focused on providing the best service and ensuring a positive experience for all guests." Her words were measured, thoughtful, and sincere. The billionaire nodded slowly. He had come seeking control, but what he had received instead was a lesson in humility, patience, and respect. He realized that the situation had given him more than a meal or a moment of confrontation. It had given him a deeper understanding of human character and the value of integrity. He could see clearly now that wealth and power did not automatically command respect, and that true strength often resides quietly in the most unexpected places. Guests at nearby tables who had observed the interaction were quietly impressed. They had witnessed a rare moment where status, authority, and assumptions were challenged by calm intelligence and professionalism. The waitress had shown that competence, dignity, and humility could shift the dynamics of power without confrontation or arrogance. The lesson was subtle but powerful. Judgment based on appearance or role is rarely accurate, and respect is most meaningful when it is earned. The billionaire took a deep breath and looked at the waitress with a mixture of admiration and reflection. "I realize now that I have much to learn about people," he said thoughtfully. "I have spent my life focusing on business, wealth, and influence, but interactions like this remind me that there is more to understand about human character and respect. You have taught me that, in ways I did not expect." The waitress smiled faintly, her calmness unwavering. "Life often teaches us lessons in unexpected ways, sir. Sometimes the people we least expect can remind us of the importance of humility, patience, and integrity. I am glad that our interaction has been meaningful." Her words were simple, yet they carried weight, highlighting the human-centered wisdom she had demonstrated throughout the evening. The billionaire reflected silently on his behavior. He had come with impatience, frustration, and a desire to assert dominance. He had underestimated someone in a role he considered subordinate. And yet, through calm composure, intelligence, and dignity, she had reversed the dynamic, showing him that power is not defined by wealth or position alone. True influence comes from respect, competence, and the ability to act with integrity. He leaned back in his chair, a rare smile forming on his face. It was not the triumphant smile of someone asserting authority, but a thoughtful, almost reflective smile. He had been challenged, humbled, and impressed all at once. The experience had been unexpected, but it was also profoundly valuable. The waitress continued her work, attending to other guests while keeping the same quiet poise she had displayed throughout the evening. She had navigated a difficult situation, maintained her dignity, and demonstrated that professionalism and calm intelligence can command respect in ways that intimidation and wealth cannot. Her actions had spoken louder than any words, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed them. As the billionaire finished his meal, he realized that the evening had given him more than just food or service. It had provided insight into human nature, humility, and respect. He understood that judging people based on assumptions, appearances, or roles can lead to misjudgment, and that true strength often lies in quiet competence and integrity. He looked at the waitress one final time before leaving the restaurant. There was a silent acknowledgement between them, a recognition of the lesson learned and the respect earned. He had entered the restaurant seeking control, but he left with understanding. He had been humbled by someone he had underestimated, and that experience would stay with him far longer than any business victory or financial achievement. The guests who had observed the interaction left the restaurant with a quiet sense of admiration. They had witnessed a moment where human character, intelligence, and composure had outshone status and authority. The story of the evening would likely be retold, not as a tale of conflict, but as a demonstration of the power of dignity, professionalism, and respect. The waitress finished her shift, her composure unchanged. She had faced a challenging situation, maintained her integrity, and emerged with respect and admiration. Her example served as a reminder that true strength is often quiet, that intelligence and skill cannot always be measured by role or status, and that humility and professionalism can leave a lasting impact. The billionaire, walking out into the night, reflected on the lessons he had learned. He had been confronted with unexpected competence and intelligence, challenged to reconsider his assumptions, and reminded of the value of respect and humility. The experience had changed his perspective not just on the waitress, but on the way he viewed people and the importance of understanding before judgment. The evening ended quietly, but its impact was far-reaching. The waitress had turned a potentially humiliating encounter into a demonstration of grace, intelligence, and professionalism. The billionaire had learned a valuable lesson about humility, respect, and the limits of assumptions. And the guests who had witnessed it all had gained insight into the subtle yet profound ways in which character and competence reveal themselves. In the end, the story was not about wealth, status, or power. It was about human dignity, intelligence, and the quiet strength that comes from professionalism and integrity. It was about how assumptions can be challenged and humility can be learned. And most importantly, it was about the lasting impact of a single interaction where respect was earned, not demanded, and where character shone brighter than authority ever could. The waitress left the restaurant that night with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the evening. She had faced a test of patience, skill, and composure, and had navigated it flawlessly. She had earned respect not through confrontation, but through quiet intelligence and professionalism. And in doing so, she reminded everyone who witnessed her actions that true strength often resides where it is least expected, and that dignity and competence are always more powerful than wealth or status alone. The billionaire, reflecting on the evening as he returned to his world of business and influence, carried with him a new understanding. He had been reminded that power is not measured by authority alone, that assumptions can mislead, and that respect must be earned through integrity, skill, and humility. The encounter had left a mark, a lesson that would remain with him far longer than the fleeting frustration he had felt earlier in the evening. And so the night ended, not with conflict or humiliation, but with insight, understanding, and a quiet appreciation for human character. The story of the evening was not just about a waitress and a billionaire. It was about the lessons that emerge when we are challenged to see beyond assumptions, when humility meets intelligence, and when dignity outshines authority. It was a story that would resonate with anyone who understood that true strength and respect are earned, quietly, patiently, and with integrity.